Hello again. I've been reading this recently published book. It's called Why We Kneel and How We Rise by a black cricketer or former cricketer called Michael Holding. It's published by Simon & Schuster, which is a mainstream publishing house. And according to the blurb, Holding explores history, the uncomfortable and unedited history that has been ignored for far too long. He tells the stories left untold about accomplishments of black people throughout history. Well, it says here, this is a book that will stay with you. It will shock you. Well, yes, I did find it shocking because it contains so many inaccuracies that it's hard to know where to begin. Some of them, the claim that a black man invented the spark plug in 1839, decades before the invention of the internal combustion engine, might just be careless and shoddy research. I'll concede that. Others, though, are so glaringly obviously wrong that I can only assume, I'm talking now about things that you can check up on the internet in 2 seconds. I can only assume that the author knew that what he was saying was not true, which places some of the stuff in this book in the category of falsehoods. I cannot hope to cover more than a small part of this dreadful book, focusing on some of the worst instances. I'll probably do another video about it at a later point. The entire thing is intended to mislead readers and promote a false narrative of history. Let's start with an enduring piece of nonsense which is easily checked. On page 190, I quote, are we ready? Thomas Edison invented a light bulb with a paper filament. It lit up the room for sure, but it burned out by the time you clicked your fingers. The man who invented the carbon filament, which burned and burned, allowing us to have a light bulb lasting years? Lewis Howard Latimer. In 1882, Latimer received the patent for that carbon filament. He literally lit up our homes and our streets. Right, that's completely untrue. Howard Latimer did not invent the carbon filament for light bulbs. I've never heard such nonsense in my life. In England, Joseph Swan was granted a patent for a light bulb with a carbon filament in 1860. In the United States, Thomas Edison was granted a patent for a light bulb with a carbon filament in 1879. I give a link in the description to this video to a copy of that patent. His light bulbs did not burn for seconds, but for 1200 hours. In 1880, a steamship was fitted with electric lights of this design, and by 1881 they were being used in buildings as well. Howard Latimer did not invent the carbon filament for light bulbs. What he did do was come up with a way to produce filaments in different shapes. His patent, granted in 1882, 3 years after Edison's, may also be seen in the description to this video. This is quite an old story now, and black people keep pushing it, but it's nonsense for all that. On page 139, I was surprised to learn that Africans have been in America since 40,000 BC. It says here, African presence in the New World has been dated as far back as prehistoric 40,000 to 6,000 BC. This is sheer nonsense. There were no humans in the Americas in 40,000 BC at all. I have no idea where some of it, well, I have an idea where some of it's coming from. He provides a source on page 301 of the book, and the source for this information about Africans sailing to America 40,000 BC is the Negro History Bulletin, volume 38, number 7, in 1975. I have never seen anything about this anywhere else, and I think we can actually say it's complete rubbish. On page 140, we are told that there was a black Roman emperor. This was Septimus Severus, of course. He wasn't black at all. He was born in what is now Libya, but was then a Roman colony. His father was Roman, and his mother was a Phoenician, that is a Semite from what is now Lebanon. So the statement, there was a black emperor on page 140, is completely false. And I think Holding probably knows it's false. He goes on to say that the most famous example of black Romans in Britain, and describes a detachment of auxiliaries from Mauritania. This is not to be confused with Mauritania in present-day sub-Saharan Africa, of course. There is a country called Mauritania. It's got nothing to do with Roman Mauritanians. Mauritania was originally a Roman province in Morocco, and the men who lived there weren't black Africans, they were Berbers, who were white. On the next page, we are told about the Moors. I quote, "Black people used to rule the world." The grounds for this statement are that the North African Moors, together with Arabs, invaded Spain and Portugal. The only problem is these people weren't black. They were a mixture of Arabs and Berbers. Almost all the black people in North Africa at that time were slaves who had been brought across the Sahara from Central Africa. Even when he's writing about modern history, Michael Holding simply cannot be bothered to check his facts. For example, on page 143, he says, Steve McQueen, the revered filmmaker of 12 Years a Slave, went to an ESN school in London when he was a kid. No, he didn't. ESN was educationally subnormal. He didn't go to an ESN school at all. He went to Drayton Manor High School, which was a grammar school. He was in a remedial class at one point because he was dyslexic. He didn't go to an ESN school. That's absolute nonsense. Much of the material in this book has simply been cut and pasted from a quick internet search, or so I would guess, because I'm finding identical wording in this book to what comes up when you search certain things on the internet. So, according to a timeline at the back of the book, in 1889, a black American called W.A. Martin patents the lock. This is a really strange claim because, of course, Yale locks, mortise locks and so on had all been around for decades before 1889. We find the explanation in a site called the African American Registry, to which I give a link also in the description to this video. It claims in the same words, on this date in 1889, W.A. Martin patented the lock. Not true. It goes on to say this device was an improvement over the 4,000-year-old bolt invented by the Chinese. And this is utterly bizarre. Does whoever wrote this honestly think that until 1889 everybody was using 4,000-year-old technology to secure their homes until a black man invented the lock? Seemingly, Michael Holding has taken this at face value. Then too we find that in 1954 Philip Emeagwali was born. He will be known as the African Bill Gates. This is another popular urban myth amongst African Americans, that this Nigerian actually invented the internet. I could go on all day about the extraordinary and completely untrue claims made in this book, but just one or two more will have to do. Apparently in 1878, a black man called Osborne Dorsey invented the doorknob. This must have been a great relief for people wishing to open and close their doors. However did they manage during the 19th century until 1878 to open their doors? The answer is, of course, that they used, well, doorknobs. Also, he certainly devised a peculiar system for closing doors, but the door handle has been around for thousands of years before that. What about a black man inventing the stethoscope in 1882? Anybody actually believe that? This is all very amusing, of course, but it's also mischievous, because books of this sort are intended to stir up feelings among black people that they have been systematically cheated of recognition and their history erased. I can see the motive for having a book published which is designed to cash in on the Black Lives Matter movement and taking the knee craze, but I find it irresponsible to spread nonsense like this. It's bad enough seeing claims about Howard Latimer inventing the electric light bulb cropping up on loopy alternative history websites, but when such ahistorical foolishness is published by a respectable publishing house like Simon and Schuster, it's time to draw attention to it. I may of course be wrong about Michael Holding deliberately including mad statements, knowing them to be false. It is, I suppose, possible that he simply couldn't be bothered to look into things closely, but then that's an odd way of writing a book which is actually specifically said to be about history. Did none of the editors at Simon and Schuster notice what was going on when they checked this book? I'll be saying more about this in another video, probably tomorrow.